Would you really want a first generation Toyota Tacoma? You know, I've been thinking about this. There's really only one reason why I would want one. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to RobMotive. So yeah, I've been thinking about this. You know, would I really want a first generation Toyota Tacoma? You know, I think back years ago to the Mustang. The Mustang? The Mustang. My parents actually bought a convertible. It was a 60 some odd Mustang convertible. And it was great at first. I mean, the looks of them, awesome. But living with them, driving them daily, the things that you would miss, that was really the big problem. And after a while, it was like, you know, is this thing really worth having? Is it actually fun? So I thought I'd look at a few things to consider about the first generation Tacomas, because I do kick around the idea of actually trying to find one. But I don't know. There is one reason, though. We'll get to that at the end. First of all, the old crank windows. Remember the crank windows? Maybe you still have something that has crank windows. I know there's people out there that like them, but they were horrible. You know, you'd reach over and crank that thing 50 times, and sometimes they didn't work. They could fall off the track. Ever break one of those handles? I have. I definitely wouldn't want crank windows, but you're going to get that on a first generation Tacoma. Keyed locks. Remember the old keys, the old big weird looking keys you'd stick in? You had to unlock everything with them to get in. You couldn't just walk up and hit that fob. Oh no, you had to do it with one of those keys. Those were a drag, especially in the wintertime. I can't tell you how many times when I lived up north where we had cold weather and snow and ice, that those things would freeze up. I'd be out there in the morning, about 7:30, something like that, freezing to death, trying to get my car unlocked. That was always a drag. You'd have that with a first generation Tacoma. Not something I would really want. I'm spoiled. I like to be able to walk up and bloop, bloop, hit that little fob and have everything unlock. Number 3, the squeaks and the rattles. That's one of the things that I noticed big time about that Mustang that I mentioned earlier. Everywhere you went, every bump you hit, everything would move around, squeak and rattle. I mean, it was old. Things just weren't tight and more precise like they are today. There is a huge difference between what we have modern to what we had back then. Completely different animal. Not a whole heck of a lot of fun to drive, particularly if those things bother you. Ever have some little rattle in your dash that drives you nuts? Think about your whole truck doing that. Number 4, bed articulation. This is something that I noticed later on when I first started getting pickup trucks. Used to be when you'd get in them, you'd go over a railroad track or something, and the cab would move one way and the bed would move the other, and you could feel it. Everything was kind of moving around. You'd look in the back and you could see the bed shaking around back there. A weird feeling. We don't have that anymore. Everything is nice and tight. Everything stays where it's supposed to be. You don't see these weird things happening. Number 5, cassette tapes and 8-tracks. Are you prepared to give up your streaming music? You'd have to do that. If you got one real old that was real dated, you might have an 8-track tape player. You remember what 8-track tapes are? About the size of a small VHS tape, if you know what those are. And then there's the cassettes. The tape would stretch. It was tape. It was reading the music off of tape, right? A real thin, flexible kind of material. They would stretch. The music would get warped. Sometimes they would get stuck. Sometimes that tape would come off inside the player, and you'd be trying to pull that out without breaking it off and ruining your radio. No way would I want that. I love the modern streaming stuff. You know, you just connect your phone, hit a button, and everything plays, and it's pretty much seamless. They've got that technology down today, and I wouldn't want to go back to that in a first-gen Toyota Tacoma. How about lights? Number 6, LEDs. Everybody's crazy for LEDs. Gotta have LEDs. It's one of the biggest things that I hear that people replace or that people go to. And if you buy a truck that doesn't have one, you must be a cheapskate. Well, we didn't have those back then. We had the old yellow amber lights, you know, the ones where you're driving down a country road in the middle of the night and you can't see anything. I've been there. I did it. I grew up with that. I wouldn't want that today. I like the LED lights, both interior and exterior, depending on where they're at. I wouldn't put them in the mirrors, as I mentioned before, because they're so bright that they actually blind you. But you want that when you're driving down the road. Not to be blinded, but to be able to see. You wouldn't have those. Not in a first generation Toyota Tacoma. Number 7, how about power seats? You know, for years, people complained about the lack of power seats in the Toyota Tacoma. Now we have them. Would you want to give those up? Would you want to go back to the old push button thing? And I know a lot of people have those. They're not push button, but the rail that you have to pull. I've been spoiled. My last 2 Tacomas have power seats. I wouldn't want to go back to the old manual type. Not that it's a big deal. They do work. They're not that horrible. But once you have power, you never want to go back. Number 8, a carburetor. Remember carburetors? Forget about fuel injection. Carburetors? I had so many problems with carburetors back in the day. I had 2 or 3 different cars where I must have replaced the carburetors, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times in each one because they never did run right. The worst time was when I was at a stoplight in the middle of a busy intersection. I was driving a Camaro back then, and it stopped. It turned off because things weren't right. The carburetor wasn't adjusted properly. It would not restart. I had to get out by myself in the middle of a busy intersection. Nobody helped me. I don't know. So I get out and I'm straddling the door and I'm pushing that thing and then jump back in while it coasts off the road. I would not want to deal with that again. We are way better off having fuel injected vehicles today. And lastly, number 9, the ride quality. You know, it's amazing how far the Toyota Tacoma has come. Trucks in general. They ride really more like luxurious SUVs. That's comparing them back to the old earlier models like the first generation Toyota Tacoma. The ride is so much more comfortable. You can take a truck off with the family, go on a trip across country, and do it in comfort. You don't have to listen to everybody complain about how rough it rides, how it slams every bump when you go off the road or over the road. Unless, of course, you lift it, put bigger wheels and tires on, and diminish the ride quality. But, they're pretty good these days. Lastly, the one thing I wanted to mention, the only reason, one reason why I would want a first generation Toyota Tacoma, well, there's really 2. 1, I mentioned, I love the look of it. I think they look awesome. But 2 is to be able to mod them out. I wouldn't leave it stock. I would change the suspension and the wheels and the tires and everything on it, update the technology inside, might even try to throw a power seat in there if it wasn't cost prohibitive. Anyway, leave a comment. Let me know. Would you really want a first generation Toyota Tacoma? Would you be willing to give up all of the modern creature comforts that we have today? I'd be curious to know. Also, real quick, I do have 2 additional channels. RobMotive MT, all about mini trucks, currently the Hyundai Santa Cruz, and RobMotive JT, all about Jeep Gladiators. Check them out, and if you're interested, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.